Today, I want to tell you a few thoughts about compulsive eating. So, I've always had this tendency to want to wolf down all the food I've been given and then wish I could eat more. I think it has something to do with wrongly using food to cure my thirst and partly maybe psychological reasons, maybe not having enough activities to occupy myself with. I don't know if this has anything to do with anxiety. I know my mother's a highly anxious person and she used to always be obese. And I vaguely remember that when I was a kid, she used to eat a lot. And one of the things she would eat was rice, but she could only stand to eat rice if she put salt on it. And I used to eat rice and sprinkle a certain amount of salt on it. So looking back, I feel like I was addicted to salt too. So I remember that when I was 15, I thought I was too skinny, and then I started eating a snack after school and or before going to bed. But it wasn't even stuff that should be healthy. It was stuff like cheese and crackers and ice cream and Doritos chips and shortbread cookies. And when I was 14 to about 25, I was chronically fatigued. The chronic fatigue could have been partly from going to sleep too late, not waking up early enough, starting homework too late. And I remember that high school started at 7:20 in the morning. And then when I was about 16, my childhood anxiety about death and dying morphed into a fear of eating certain food ingredients, and every so often I would add another food ingredient to my mental list of ingredients I could not eat till I got to the point where I thought only fruit was any good. And then about 3 days later, I added in some fish to avoid feeling too stupid about myself due to the possibility of not eating protein-containing foods. And then at some time I added in lettuce, and I thought I had this perfect diet worked out. Now I think I was just wrongly using food to cure my thirst. Immediately after I started eating this weird diet, my chronic fatigue disappeared overnight. So I immediately jumped to the conclusion that my chronic fatigue was caused by grain. Now I think it was too much not enough water and too much sodium. And I hated school, so maybe I was having intrusive thoughts about food to distract myself from school. And then I went to a graduate program I didn't like. I really didn't like this graduate program. They kept having more and more thoughts about food and obsessions about cooking, and I would spend too much time grocery shopping. And I had phases where I was obsessed with cooking various different foods. And I was so glad when that graduate program was over. And I think I was chronically eating too few calories. And every so often I would go nuts and wolf down a bunch of dates or dried figs or dried apricots or raisins. It was like I was using the dried fruit to compensate for the fact that I had been eating too few calories from watery fruit. And then, I don't know what else there is. Well, I reverted back to eating certain cooked food, but not like stuff like pizza and pie and donuts and junk food, but stuff like rice and beans, and even that, who knows if it's healthy, but I'm gonna eat it anyways. I still eat some fish. I ate some chicken recently. But I remember in college I would have these terrible episodes, not that often. I don't know how often I had these episodes where I would be desperately hungry, and I would eat a certain amount of food, and the food wouldn't cure my hunger, and I would eat some more, and I was still hungry, and I would keep taking a little bit more food, and a little bit more food, and a little bit more, and I vaguely felt like something was wrong, and I think I was probably mostly using food to wrongly cure my thirst, maybe eating too much sodium, and maybe using eating as a distraction from the fact that I hated school. So I would say if you eat food and then you're hungry again, are you using food to wrongly cure your thirst? You could do an experiment where you try to estimate how many calories you use in a day and then get a piece of paper and write like meal number 1, meal number 2, and meal number 3, and maybe even meal number 4, and then write the number of calories you're going to eat at each meal, and then experiment with using food scales to weigh out how much food you're going to eat so you get a certain amount of calories per meal. I mean, I guess that's almost too obsessive compulsive, but I guess you could do an experiment where you try to re-educate yourself about what an appropriate serving sizes of foods are, and then you figure out how much you're going to eat at each sitting, and then you eat that amount, and then you just don't eat anymore. Don't add oil, salt, or sweeteners to anything. So get yourself unaddicted to oil, salt, and sweeteners. And then after you eat the amount of food you designate for yourself, if you're still hungry, just take some really deep breaths, like do some breathing exercises while slowly sipping some water. See if you're wrongly using food to cure your thirst. But don't alternate between taking sips of water and taking bites of food, because if you're alternating between taking bites of food and taking sips of water, you might be in desperate need of water. So maybe drink the water before you start to eat, or maybe after. And if you're still hungry after you've eaten, just put up with the hunger and just try not to do anything about it. Oh, I went to a doctor and he put a scope in my nose and down my throat and told me I had some heartburn. And I did have episodes where I've had like crushing chest pains, and also I would wake up and I would have this really bad acidity taste in my mouth. So he's right about the heartburn. It's probably partly psychological and partly from overeating. So the heartburn's probably my own fault. So that those are my suggestions. So I trying to really control myself and not like eat too much per sitting, but a lot of times I eat and then like I'm still hungry after I eat. And I don't know if maybe part of my brain just has a problem where appropriate amounts of food don't satisfy my hunger. I know when I see my mom now, when we have dinner, she'll eat like something like a bit of chicken interspersed with a lot of bites of either cabbage or some other vegetables. And then she'll clear the plates away, and then she'll spend the next 2 or 3 hours slowly eating about 1 to 2 pounds or more of grapes. And I think she's always had a problem with compulsive eating. Like, I think part of her brain can't tolerate eating unless she gets to wolf down a huge amount of food when she eats. So intuitively, she wants to switch from eating a huge quantities of low calorie food to, huge quantities of high calorie foods to huge quantities of low calorie foods. But she doesn't intuitively want to overcome her addiction to eating huge amounts of food. So it's not good enough to just not eat too many calories. You need to eat a lower volume of food too. But she also wrongly believes that she can't eat certain foods that should be healthy, like brown rice or sweet potato, because she doesn't weigh out food, which could be obsessive compulsive. But what if you do an experiment where you get something like that should be healthy, but it's calorie dense, and you weigh a certain amount so that you figure out how many ounces you need to get a certain amount of calories, and then you just eat that amount, and you just don't eat anymore. Then you'd be like super disappointed that you don't get to keep wolfing down more food, but you just power through. And also, I developed this habit where I brush my teeth or a little bit, or and floss after I eat. Like I can't eat now unless I floss and sometimes brush my teeth too. But I think that helps. Like it gets the nasty taste of food particles out of my mouth, and then my mouth stops salivating, and then I know that I can't eat more until it's time to eat again. Also, you need to decide like how many minutes and hours should last between the time you finish eating and the time you eat again. And if you're hungry before you think it's time to eat, just don't do anything about it. Just don't eat until it's time to eat again. Or maybe just drink some water. Those are my thoughts about compulsive eating.